Get ready, because August 22nd is not simply another square on the calendar, and if you treat it like an ordinary day, you may miss the deeper shift happening underneath everything you can see. Today, the Sun leaves Leo and crosses into Virgo, and under ordinary circumstances, that would be nothing more than a familiar movement from one zodiac season into another. But these are not ordinary circumstances. The sky is moving through the middle of an eclipse portal, and the atmosphere surrounding this transition carries a much heavier sense of closure, release, and reconstruction. We are positioned between the total solar eclipse that shook Leo on August 12th and the partial lunar eclipse in Pisces approaching on August 28th. That means the Sun entering Virgo does not arrive in isolation. It becomes part of a larger process unfolding between two eclipses, right in the center of a period when old patterns can become impossible to ignore. During these days, you may have noticed something unusual in your body, especially around your stomach. Perhaps there has been unexplained bloating, physical tension, pressure, or an uncomfortable sensation in your abdomen that seems difficult to connect to anything obvious. If you've been wondering why your body feels different lately, keep paying attention, because within the symbolism of this transition, that physical awareness becomes part of the larger story. The next 7 days matter because the period between now and August 28th is not being presented as a gentle adjustment. It is a dismantling process, a period in which structures you once assumed would remain stable can begin to reveal their weaknesses or simply stop fitting the person you are becoming. Many people may experience these changes and immediately label them as stress, bad luck, exhaustion, or simply a terrible week. But when you understand the larger astrological pattern, the experience can feel very different. Instead of believing that everything is randomly falling apart, you begin to recognize that something is being cleared so that another structure can eventually take its place. And that awareness changes how you move through the uncertainty. The transition itself is important, but the hours leading into it deserve even more attention than most people realize. Much of the focus will naturally fall on the moment when the Sun enters Virgo today at around 10 p.m. Yet the deeper story begins earlier on August 22nd. Before leaving Leo, the Sun reaches the anaretic degree, the final degree of a zodiac sign, a position traditionally associated with crisis, culmination, urgency, and the final expression of a sign before the energy moves somewhere else. Imagine standing at the very edge of a room after spending a long time inside it, knowing that you cannot carry everything with you through the doorway. That is the psychological atmosphere of this moment. The Sun, still holding the last expression of Leo, forms a perfect opposition to the North Node in Aquarius. Because of that opposition, the Sun is positioned directly across from the South Node in Leo, bringing attention to the symbolic territory of karmic release and the patterns that have become familiar through repetition. The South Node can describe the habits, identities, and emotional responses that feel safe because you already know how to live inside them, even when those same patterns prevent you from moving forward. In Leo, that symbolism can become especially personal. It can involve the desire to be noticed, the longing for recognition, the need for applause, or the identity you constructed around being the central character in your own story. There is nothing inherently wrong with wanting to be appreciated, but this moment asks a more uncomfortable question. What happens when your sense of worth depends on being seen? What happens when you have spent so much energy proving your importance that you have forgotten what remains when nobody is watching? The opposition between the Sun and the North Node places that question directly in front of you before the Sun leaves Leo. It creates a symbolic confrontation between the identity you have been maintaining and the direction that requires you to release it. The message is not that you have no value. The deeper message is that you cannot discover the next version of yourself while gripping the previous version with both hands. This may explain why some people have felt an unusual emptiness in recent days. There can be a strange quietness inside you, a feeling that something familiar is disappearing, without a clear replacement appearing yet. It may feel like exhaustion, emotional distance, or a loss of certainty. But within this astrological framework, it can also be understood as the dissolution of an old identity. You know the feeling when a role you once performed naturally suddenly feels too small, yet you have not figured out what role comes next. That space between identities can feel uncomfortable because the mind wants immediate answers. It wants a label, a reason, a destination. But this transition asks you to tolerate the uncertainty long enough for the old structure to loosen. Then, only a few hours later, the sun enters Virgo, and the atmosphere changes. You move from the dramatic self-expression of Leo into the practical, discerning, service-oriented territory of Virgo. The symbolism shifts from asking how you can be noticed to asking what you can genuinely contribute. Instead of measuring yourself through attention, validation, or recognition, you begin examining usefulness, responsibility, improvement, and meaningful action. This is the first of the 5 resets, and it creates the foundation for everything that follows. Your identity is being rewritten, not because you are becoming less important, but because your understanding of importance is changing. You may begin to notice that the questions occupying your mind are different. Instead of asking how you can make people notice you, you start asking how you can actually be useful. Instead of wondering whether others recognize your value, you begin looking at what your presence creates, repairs, improves, or contributes. That is the deeper turning point inside this transition. The old identity does not disappear simply because the sun changes signs. It begins to lose its authority over you when you realize that you no longer need to organize your entire life around being the person everyone sees. And as the sun leaves Leo behind and enters Virgo, this first transformation opens the door to the next stage of the reset. What appears to be a small adjustment on the surface may actually become one of the most profound identity shifts you've experienced, because for years, and perhaps for your entire life, you may have been shaping yourself around an image of who you believed you were supposed to be. You learned how to present yourself, how to perform, how to protect a reputation, how to maintain an image, and how to become the version of yourself that received approval from the outside world. Then something begins to change quietly. There is no dramatic explosion announcing that the old identity is finished. Instead, it can feel like waking up one morning and realizing that the role you have been playing no longer feels natural. You look at your social media presence, your professional title, your reputation, or even the image you have carefully maintained for years, and something inside you simply does not respond anymore. There may be no anger and no obvious grief. There can be something much stranger, a quiet emptiness, as though you are finally recognizing that these external definitions never completely captured who you were. This is where the Virgo reset becomes so significant. Virgo is not primarily concerned with how impressive you appear. It turns your attention toward what actually functions, what you contribute, what you improve, and what you can genuinely bring into the life you are living right now. The question becomes much more immediate than some distant vision of who you might become years from now. What are you actually contributing today? What role are you truly serving through the way you live, work, communicate, and show up in ordinary moments? This question is not designed to make you feel insignificant. It is meant to bring you back to something tangible and authentic. Once the performance begins to fall away, what remains can be far more durable than an image. Skills remain, character remains, the ability to contribute remains. The things you have genuinely learned cannot be taken away simply because someone stops applauding. This is the movement from seeking validation toward developing capability, from wanting to be admired toward becoming genuinely necessary through what you can do. And for many of you, that process has already started. You may have felt yourself losing interest in proving something, but you did not have language for the change until now. At the same time, your relationships may be entering their own confrontation with reality. On August 21st, the day before the Sun enters Virgo, Venus in Libra forms an exact opposition to Saturn in Aries. The symbolism becomes deeply personal when you translate the astrology into the emotional questions underneath it. Venus seeks harmony, connection, beauty, cooperation, and the feeling that two people can exist together without constant friction. Saturn operates differently. Saturn asks whether the foundation beneath the relationship can actually carry its weight. It does not care how beautiful the partnership appears from the outside if the structure underneath it is unstable. So you may find yourself facing questions that are difficult, precisely because you already know the answers. Is this relationship based on mutual respect, or is it being held together by the fear of being alone? Are you staying because love is genuinely present, or because leaving feels more frightening than pretending everything is acceptable? The opposition creates pressure between what your heart wants and what your reality can realistically sustain. For some people, this can feel painful. A partnership that seems secure may suddenly feel distant. Someone may become colder than expected. A conversation may expose emotional distance that has been developing quietly for much longer than either person wanted to admit. Yet the deeper meaning is not punishment. This confrontation reveals where you have accepted less than you truly needed, where you have sacrificed boundaries simply to preserve peace, and where fear of conflict allowed someone else to cross lines you once promised yourself would never be crossed. Sometimes, the most revealing moment in a relationship is not when someone leaves, but when you finally stop pretending that something is working. Then the Sun enters Virgo the following day, and the energy asks you to respond differently to everything that surfaced through the Venus-Saturn opposition. Instead of waiting for the relationship to repair itself through hope alone, you become more practical. You look at what actually needs to change. You become willing to establish boundaries, speak honestly, and have conversations that may be uncomfortable but necessary. You begin separating what you are genuinely willing to build from what you are no longer willing to carry. This is not about destroying love. It is about refusing to keep calling something love when its foundation cannot support the relationship you need. The partnerships capable of moving through this pressure can emerge stronger because reality has been addressed instead of avoided. The relationships that cannot survive the confrontation may reveal that they were never capable of carrying the future you were asking them to carry. And somewhere inside yourself, you may already recognize the difference. Then, the story moves from your relationships into your body, because the physical sensations you have been experiencing may become much harder to dismiss. Remember that unusual tension around your stomach, the discomfort that seemed difficult to explain, the feeling that something was happening inside you before your mind could identify it. There is a specific astrological development connected to that symbolism. Less than 24 hours after the Sun enters Virgo, it forms a perfect trine with Chiron in Taurus. Chiron carries the archetype of the wounded healer, representing a wound so deep that the goal is not simply to erase it, but to transform the experience into wisdom. In Taurus, this symbolism is connected with the body, stability, worth, security, and the deeply rooted belief that you must somehow earn the right to rest. It can expose the assumption that your value depends on how much you produce, how much you accomplish, or how useful you remain to everyone around you. Slowing down can then feel like weakness, and resting can trigger guilt instead of relief. That is where this connection becomes especially meaningful. Virgo is associated with the digestive system, the small intestine, the pancreas, and the intricate network of nerves located throughout the abdomen, often described as the second brain. This system contains hundreds of millions of neurons and produces the great majority of the serotonin in your body. And as this astrological pattern unfolds, the relationship between what you have been carrying emotionally and what you have been experiencing physically becomes impossible to ignore within the symbolism of the transit. The body can become the place where a truth arrives, before the conscious mind is ready to name it, and that realization leads directly into the deeper layer of this reset. Your body does far more than process what you eat, and during this period, the deeper symbolism suggests that it may also be carrying everything you have been unable to process emotionally. Information, pressure, intense feelings, unresolved experiences, and accumulated trauma can all become part of the internal weight you carry through daily life. You may have spent this entire eclipse season operating through adrenaline, moving from one demand to another, absorbing the intensity of this month without ever giving yourself enough space to stop and actually process what has happened. When life moves faster than your ability to emotionally digest it, the body can become the place where that overload finally becomes impossible to ignore. Within this astrological interpretation, that is why the stomach becomes such an important part of the story. The bloating, the strange abdominal tension, sudden food sensitivities, or persistent mental fog that some of you may have noticed can feel like your body has been sending warnings long before your conscious mind was ready to listen. You may have dismissed those sensations as ordinary stress or told yourself that they would disappear if you simply pushed harder and kept functioning. But the deeper message of this reset is about recognizing the difference between functioning and actually being well within yourself. You've been trying to perform your life while your inner system has been asking for a pause. The perfect trine between the Sun and Chiron in Taurus creates the symbolism for breaking that pattern. It challenges the belief that rest must be earned through productivity. Rest is not something you receive only after you have completed every responsibility, satisfied everyone around you, or proven that you deserve to stop. Within this transit, rest becomes something necessary for maintaining yourself. Your worth begins to separate from your output. You are allowed to exist without constantly presenting evidence that your existence has value. This becomes the reset that takes place through the body. It asks you to become more conscious of what you allow into your internal environment, and that means more than food alone. It includes information, noise, stimulation, emotional intensity, and everything that repeatedly enters your awareness. Your body has been attempting to communicate with you, and this moment asks you to stop treating those signals as interruptions and begin seeing them as information. If you had been telling yourself that these sensations are merely stress or coincidence, this is the point where you are being asked to pay closer attention to the connection between what you experience internally and how you move through your life. In the symbolic language of astrology, your system is recalibrating, and the timing of the transit creates a specific window for supporting that process. Then the focus shifts from the body to the mind, and the change becomes almost impossible to miss. On August 27th, the Sun and Mercury meet at the exact degree in Virgo in an alignment known as a cazimi. This is not presented as an ordinary Mercury moment, because Mercury rules Virgo and is exalted in Virgo, placing Mercury in one of its strongest possible positions. Symbolically, Mercury sits at the heart of the Sun, and that imagery describes a mind being exposed to intense illumination, as though every layer of confusion, hesitation, and mental fog is being brought directly into the light. Think about the weeks leading into this moment. The eclipse atmosphere has created emotional turbulence, uncertainty, and an overwhelming amount of internal movement. You may have found yourself thinking in circles, trying to solve problems that seem to become more complicated every time you examined them. Perhaps you knew a decision had to be made, yet every possible choice created another question. Perhaps you tried to organize your thoughts and could not find a clear sequence. You knew something needed to change, but you could not identify exactly what the next move should be. Then August 27th arrives, and the symbolism of the cazimi describes a dramatic shift in mental clarity. Rather than gradually becoming clearer over a long period, the experience can feel sudden, like a light being switched on in a room where you have been searching in the dark. A problem that appeared impossible to untangle can suddenly reveal the point where it needs to be addressed. A decision that has consumed weeks of mental energy can become surprisingly obvious. The constant internal debate can quiet down, allowing your thinking to become more focused, precise, and organized. This is the cognitive reset. It is the point where the mental operating system is symbolically upgraded after everything that previously interfered with clear thinking has been brought to the surface. And the sequence matters. This clarity arrives after the identity crisis, after the relationship confrontation, and after the body begins moving through its own process of healing within the symbolism of the transits. You cannot think with complete clarity when your identity is constantly demanding protection. You cannot make grounded decisions when your relationships are consuming the energy you need for yourself. You cannot access the full quality of your thinking while your nervous system remains locked in survival mode. The first three resets clear away interference, and the fourth one symbolically turns the lights back on. This creates a powerful window for reorganizing your life, restructuring your work, gathering scattered ideas into an actual plan, and setting intentions with the precision associated with Virgo. If you have had fragments of an idea floating around your mind but could never organize them into something coherent, this is the kind of moment where those fragments can begin forming a structure. The clarity does not arrive simply to make you feel better. It gives you an opportunity to use your attention differently. When a rare moment of mental precision appears, you do not want to waste it by returning to the same confusion that existed before. Yet there is one final movement waiting at the end of this sequence, and it changes the relationship between clarity and control completely. On August 28th, the full moon arrives together with a partial lunar eclipse in Pisces, and the atmosphere shifts again. After spending an entire week immersed in Virgo energy, organizing, analyzing, repairing, optimizing, creating systems, establishing boundaries, and attempting to bring order to every part of your life, Pisces arrives with a completely different lesson. It brings you toward the territory where control becomes less reliable. This is precisely the experience Virgo can find most uncomfortable, because Virgo wants to understand what is happening, identify what needs to be corrected, and create a practical method for handling it. Pisces moves differently. It asks you to recognize that not everything can be managed through analysis. The partial lunar eclipse in Pisces therefore becomes the final disruption in this sequence. It does not necessarily arrive softly. Lunar eclipses are associated with endings, emotional revelations, and moments when something previously hidden can rise into awareness with the force of a sudden emotional tide. After spending days trying to organize every variable, you may reach a point where the lesson is no longer about organizing the situation. It is about recognizing what cannot be controlled, and that final realization carries the story into its next stage. Do not assume that the final stage of this eclipse sequence will simply ask you to organize what remains, because the Pisces eclipse introduces a lesson that cannot be solved through organization alone. It can remove people, circumstances, attachments, and beliefs that have already completed their purpose in your life. And it may do so according to a timing you never personally chose. That is what makes this part of the process so uncomfortable. You may have created a plan for how things were supposed to unfold, but the Pisces eclipse does not ask for your permission before revealing what must be released. Its message is that you have already done the work. You examined the machinery, looked closely at what was functioning and what was not, cleaned out what needed to be removed, and tried to make the system more efficient. Now you are being asked to stop gripping the final outcome. There are circumstances you were never meant to repair. There are situations you cannot manage through effort alone. There are wounds that cannot be resolved by constantly analyzing them. And some things only begin to transform when you finally stop forcing them to remain in your hands. This is where the deeper shadow of Virgo becomes visible. Virgo's shadow is not laziness, and it is not disorder. It is the belief that enough planning can make life completely predictable. It is the assumption that if you work hard enough, organize every detail carefully enough, anticipate every possible problem, and remain anxious enough about every outcome, you can prevent anything painful from happening. That belief can feel productive because it keeps you busy. But underneath the productivity, there can be fear. You may convince yourself that you are being responsible when you are actually trying to protect yourself from uncertainty. The Pisces eclipse breaks open that illusion by showing you that control has limits. You can build the most efficient system imaginable and still encounter something that requires trust. You can prepare every detail and still need faith. You can understand the mechanics of healing and still discover that healing involves something deeper than mechanics. This is where the two sides of the process finally meet. The medicine matters, but so does faith. The body needs the mind, but the mind also needs the soul. That realization becomes the final piece of the entire sequence, because the 5 resets are not separate experiences happening randomly. They converge into one integrated transformation. You are being asked to become someone who can be practical without becoming rigid, disciplined without becoming controlling, attentive to details without becoming trapped by them, and spiritually open without abandoning responsibility. That is the integration at the center of this process. So now step back and look at the entire picture, because the sequence only makes sense when you see how each part connects to the next. Across these 7 days, the resets unfold with such an interconnected rhythm that they can feel less like isolated events and more like a deliberate dismantling of everything in your life that has stopped functioning. First, your identity is stripped back. Then your relationships are tested against reality. Your body demands that you listen instead of continuing to push through. Your mind receives the opportunity for greater clarity. Finally, your attachment to control is challenged so that something you could never have planned can have room to emerge. That may sound overwhelming, especially if you are already feeling emotionally or physically stretched, but there is one distinction you need to hold on to. You are not being destroyed. You are being refined. This is Virgo energy expressed at its highest level. It is not criticism directed against yourself. It is not punishment. It is not an endless demand for perfection. It is the sacred process of identifying what genuinely nourishes you and separating it from what has slowly been draining you. Think of the way a harvest requires dead growth to be cut away so that what is still alive can be gathered and preserved. The removal is not proof that the entire field has failed. It is part of preparing the living crop for what comes next. In the same way, the version of you that emerges on August 29th can be calmer, steadier, and more capable than the person listening right now. Not because the universe suddenly hands you something you never possessed, but because the interference has finally been cleared enough for abilities that were already inside you to become visible. That distinction matters. The transformation is not necessarily about becoming someone completely different. It is about removing the layers that prevented your existing strength, intelligence, discipline, and inner wisdom from operating clearly. This week is not simply happening to you. Within the meaning of this eclipse portal, it is happening for you. The people who understand that difference are the ones who can move through the discomfort instead of spending all their energy fighting it. They enter September, changed because they learn to cooperate with the process, rather than interpreting every disruption as evidence that something has gone wrong. Others may feel the same pressure and respond by resisting every change. They may blame their work, their relationships, their circumstances, or the timing of events without recognizing that the disruption itself was revealing a path toward their own evolution. They may become so focused on fighting the process that they never stop long enough to understand what it is showing them. Do not become one of those people. There is a reason this message has captured your attention. Something within you recognized the subject before your conscious mind could explain why. Trust that pull, because the energy developing through this period is not waiting indefinitely. When you finally understand what the moment was asking you to release, the eclipse portal will already have moved forward. So when the sun crosses into Virgo today, become observant. Notice what your body communicates instead of immediately dismissing it. Notice who remains present and who begins moving away. Notice the thoughts that arrive with sudden and unmistakable clarity. Most importantly, notice the moment when you understand that letting go is not the same thing as weakness. Sometimes releasing your grip requires more courage than holding on ever did. You may have spent years believing strength meant controlling the outcome, fixing every problem, maintaining every relationship, and carrying every responsibility yourself. This moment offers a different definition of strength. Sometimes strength means recognizing what belongs to you and what does not. Sometimes it means doing the work and then accepting that the result cannot be forced. Sometimes it means allowing an old identity, relationship, belief, or expectation to leave without chasing after it. That is why this is more than another transit in the sky. It represents a turning point, and you are standing directly at its edge. If this message resonated with what you have been experiencing, thank you for giving it your attention. If you found value in the message and want to continue exploring this kind of spiritual and astrological guidance, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support is genuinely appreciated. You can also share your own experiences and reflections in the comments, especially if you have already noticed changes in your identity, relationships, body, thoughts, or ability to release control. Take care of yourself. Stay aware of what this transition is revealing, and remember that the most important part of the reset may not be what enters your life next, but what you finally become willing to stop carrying.